We want to thank you for joining us here today for the Watchmen Ministry North Idaho Sheriff's Forum. The job of sheriff is very important to this community, and we are thankful to have the candidates attend this forum. We acknowledge that running for any elected position is not an easy decision. All of the candidates running have committed a huge amount of time, resources, and finances to running for this office. We are thankful for all of your commitments of the time away from your families in order to serve this community. If we could have Pastor Paul Van Oy come up and lead us in prayer.
Thanks, Dan. And thank you, candidates, for being here. Lord, thank you for this time. Thank you for these that are running for sheriff for Kootenai County. We are so desperate for good, godly, solid leadership. And Lord, we know that you have in mind exactly who the right person should be to fill this office. We love our state. We love our country. We love our county. And Lord, we ask that you would give wisdom and direction to those that are listening, to these candidates as they share their views, that they would speak truthfully, honestly, clearly, and that we would be able to learn how we can be best educated in making good decisions, the right decisions about how we vote. We thank you for these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
We would like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if everyone would stand, please. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started with the forum, we would like to remind everyone that this election will be done by mail only. It is important that everyone registers to receive an absentee ballot by May 19th. We have a link and instructions on the Watchmen Ministry North Idaho website under voter resources on how to register to receive an absentee ballot. We would also like to encourage everyone to take the time to learn as much as they can about every candidate. The voter guides on the Watchmen Ministry North Idaho website are a great starting point. We would encourage everyone to do their own research. One of the candidates here today before you has provided methods on their website to contact them to answer any additional questions you might have. Please take the time to become an informed voter. Pray about your choices. Fill out your absentee ballot. Mail it in and pray about the results. We wanted to let all the candidates know that whoever is elected sheriff, we will support. We might not agree with you all of the time, but we will support you. So here are the rules for the forum, just so that everyone is aware. Each candidate will have 5 minutes for an opening statement and 5 minutes for a closing statement at the end of the forum. Each candidate will answer the same questions. We anticipate having approximately 10 to 12 questions, but that will depend upon time. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer per question. No personal attacks towards the other candidates. Be respectful of one another and remember that the purpose of the forum is for voters to get to know you better. We will now begin with the candidates' opening statements in alphabetical order, beginning with Mrs. Edmondson.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for hosting us today in this different platform than probably originally intended. My name is Kim Edmondson, and I'm a candidate for Kootenai County Sheriff. I have been in our community for over 30 years. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. That's where I was born, and I moved to San Jose, California when I was 5 years old, and to Spokane when I was 10, and grew up in the Spokane area, so just right over the state line. I made the big move over to Kootenai County in 1987 to attend North Idaho College. And since that time, I've never looked back, haven't left the area, and have just enjoyed this community and everything that it has to offer. I've been a very involved member of the community. I volunteer and have volunteered over all of the years that I've lived here. So it isn't something that's just been a stunt basically for the political arena. This is something that's been very important and was instilled in me by my father and my mother as I was growing up to be able to give back to the community that we lived in. And so that's something that's been very important to me. I've worked through 4-H, a hospice volunteer. I have volunteered for the North Idaho Fair and Rodeo Foundation Board, put on really large fundraisers, the Cowboy Ball. I've been the chairperson for that, and that's their biggest fundraiser as far as the foundation goes. Did that for a couple of years, but very active in the community as far as that goes. I was a community Red Cross instructor, and in 1992, I was hired at the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. I was hired in as a detention deputy, and since that time, over the last 28 years, I have worked throughout the organization. The last 15 years, I've been in a command position and a leadership role within the organization, and I've commanded the detective division, the services division of the jail. I've been the commander of the jail. I developed a new division called the Professional Standards Division, and have since, in the last year and a half, had the investigations unit assigned to me again. So now I'm a captain, and I run the Investigations and Professional Standards Division. And through that, the 15 years of experience as a commander, I've had the opportunity to build and manage very large budgets, build contracts with different intents. So we brought the contract medical and contract kitchen to those services to the jail when I was the division commander there. And those are things that I think are really important to note, that have been involved in those types of decisions. I've also helped plan and design the last 2 jail expansions, and so I've been selected for my ability to be able to look at things that way, be creative, and come up with, in our cases, some unique designs that we've put into play. So my experience is varied. I've been in the community for, as I said, for over 30 years. Through that time, I've also continued my education. I graduated from North Idaho College with a degree in commercial design. Then I attended Lewis and Clark at the Coeur d'Alene campus, and I there got my bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary studies. And in 2016, I walked Gonzaga University and earned my master's degree in organizational leadership. And so with that being current education, I think it speaks very much to how I've, constantly been evolving is who I am, and I believe in that. I think you should always be growing. If you don't know more today than you did yesterday, then that's your fault. But those are tenets that I like to make sure to let people know as well, and to live by. So these things are really important. I want you to recognize that my longevity in the community and my longevity at the agency are very important. The slogan is at local leadership, and I believe that that is something that voters should definitely have impressed upon them. And I would appreciate your vote, and make sure that you request your mail-in ballots. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Grimm, if you would have your opening statement, please.
Thank you. My name is John Grimm. My wife and I live in Hayden, and I've been here a Kootenai County resident for over 15 years now. I grew up in Orange County, California, and 15 years ago I moved my family and my wife and my business here to North Idaho because we found a better place to raise our children. All of my kids went to North Idaho schools, Hayden Meadows Charter and Coeur d'Alene High. Currently married to Sarah Grimm for about 7.5 years now. She's a elementary school librarian, and both of my stepchildren attended Lake City High School. I'm self-employed. I've owned a manufacturing company for about 27 years now, and we do work for the medical, aerospace, and defense industries. I'm very involved in my community. I've been involved since I've lived in Kootenai County with various youth groups, including 4-H, and donating thousands of hours on behalf of the local youth to the Boy Scouts of America, a record I'm very proud of. We have a lot of young men in this community that benefit greatly from that organization. I'm running for sheriff for 3 reasons. One, like I said before, I'm involved in my community. I'm in a time in my life where I can perform this vital act of public service. And 2, the problems and issues plaguing the sheriff's office thus far have not been solved from within, and I don't believe they're going to be solved by repeating the same process that we seem to do in the rest of the country. 3, I'm concerned about the future and direction of Kootenai County as it relates to law enforcement especially and growth. And I think you have to be here for a certain amount of time to understand what's important to us in our county. I'm not career in law enforcement. I was a reserve deputy for a short time here in Idaho, but to excel in the job of sheriff, you need more than law enforcement experience. The sheriff is the administrative head of the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. He's responsible for planning, organization, and direction, and external relations, among other things. I have 3 highly qualified candidates to be your undersheriff. All of them longtime, experienced, well-known, and well-liked Idaho law enforcement professionals. Like I said before, my record of involvement to our community goes back far beyond the few months preceding this election. I encourage you to look at my website to learn more about me, and my motto, my campaign slogan is "Keep It Idaho." And if you look at our state slogan, our state motto, roughly translated means Idaho in perpetuity. And to me, that means we have a way of life here that's worth fighting for. And that's why I chose that slogan, because I love my state, I love my home, and there's a reason why we chose to live here. And it's different here, and we like it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Norris, your opening statement, please.
Thank you very much. Daniel, I would like to reiterate something that you said earlier, that as it's commonly widely known, that there was a mailer that was recently released to the residents of Kootenai County. And in that mailer, there's false information, and in that mailer, it indicates anonymous websites. I encourage everybody not to look at anonymous websites to vet any information on any candidate or any issue, period. There are absolute lies in there, and one of those lies is something that the Kootenai County Assessor's Office have given me, because it has been widely spread that I intentionally tried to defraud a taxing agency. Nothing could be further from the truth. In entry number 1, it clearly states that I told them that there was a home exemption in a different state. They obviously put 3 emails to that other county. So I just encourage you to please vet any subject, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's any candidate, any issue, with trusted websites. My name is Bob Norris, and I'm a candidate to be your sheriff. As people get to know me, they realize that I'm a lot more conservative than the average California. Well, that's true. I am very conservative. I've always been conservative. And in fact, I had to leave my Republican Party for one election in protest because they were growing government at the same rate as liberals were. And I couldn't stand for it anymore. So I became an independent. After that, I went back to the Republican Party. Absolutely, I did. So I did, because they had become just like the Democrats, and it was time for a change. My experience is that I'm a member of the Kootenai County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Team. Prior to that, I was Chief of Law Enforcement Services for 3 cities in Los Angeles County. I had 3 city managers. I had 3 mayors, 15 city council members. I had community leaders and community activists, and it was a busy time in the Norris household, absolutely. I have managed multi-million-dollar budgets as it pertains to law enforcement assets. Prior to that, I was a patrol lieutenant. Prior to that, I was a patrol sergeant. Prior to that, I was a patrol deputy. And prior to that, I was a custody lieutenant and a custody sergeant and a custody deputy. I am the only candidate that has worked, supervised, and managed law enforcement assets in both of the major functions here at the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. We are growing at such a rate, we don't have time for on-the-job training. We are at a critical point where we need to serve our residents better than what we are right now. I'm concerned about the future too. I'm concerned about our rights. I am concerned about this community changing. I am concerned about even the 2 murders that we've had in the last 5 days. This community is changing. And let's talk about the First Amendment right. Let's talk about what happened during a different administration when a Christian baker wanted to cook, or there was a gay couple that wanted a Christian baker to cook, make a cake for them. And the state and federal assets came to those Christian bakers and says, you know what, you have to make that cake for them. I've seen video online where Muslims have done the same thing to gay people, and nothing becomes of that. Absolutely nothing. Your Second Amendment right will never be compromised under a Norris administration, period. I'm the only candidate to have engaged the community in patrol activities. I absolutely believe that engaging this community, having a series of town hall meetings, and staying contacted with you and engage with you on what your issues and what your concerns are, and we are going to interpret those to our deputies out on the street because that will be their issues and concerns. My name is Bob Norris, and I appreciate your hosting this event tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your opening statement, please.
My name is Richard Whitehead. I'm a candidate for sheriff of Kootenai County. I have over 40 years of law enforcement experience, a little over 33 of that in uniform. My last law enforcement agency was Travis County, Texas, where I promoted up through the rank of captain. I've led virtually every aspect of the agency to include major crimes, SWAT, crime lab, juvenile dispatch, lake patrol. I've worked every function of the agency. I've written, bargained, and implemented $85 million budgets. I've worked on employee pay packages to solve the very issues that Kootenai County faces today. I'm the only candidate that has the hands-on proven track record of doing exactly, solving the issues exactly that Kootenai County faces today. While at the Sheriff's Office, I also recognized a training need in my agency and designed a training program that ended up growing legs outside the agency and is now one of 4 national training programs for field training. That led to me starting a training company some 25 years ago. I am a master instructor. I train nationally in field training, internationally in deception detection. I am recognized by Idaho Peace Officer Standards and Training as a subject matter expert in leadership, forensic investigations, and field training. There is no part of the agency I have not led or worked. These are critical times in Kootenai County and the future of our country. Your vote is never more important than it is today. You can find out more about me at sheriffrick.com. I am holding weekly Zoom meetings, chat meetings, since we can't publicly associate at the moment. You can find that through my website, my email list, or my social media pages, which are all Sheriff Rick. I'm asking for your vote. I am in this race because several of the agency members in the agency, retired and current, that got to know me through my training company, approached me and asked me to run. Because with the rapid growth and the future of the county, they realized that the same old is not going to work anymore, and they need a new perspective that's had a varying experience on the outside. Besides the Sheriff's Office, I have municipal law enforcement experience, and I'm a military police veteran, Army veteran, and also the only veteran in the race. I'm asking for your vote for Kootenai County Sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. We must acknowledge that 2 of the candidates are not present. Justin Nagel was unable to attend due to a previously scheduled engagement. Mike Bauer had previously confirmed he would attend. He has sent a statement that he would like us to read to you. To the participants, I regret that due to the health issues of my wife Joanne and the recent intensification of her treatments, I will be unable to attend the Watchmen Ministries North Idaho Forum today, which I was very much looking forward to. To Kim, Rick, John, and Bob, thank you for your prayers and good wishes for Joanne's speedy recovery, and please know that we have come to value your friendships through this most interesting political process. We hope to remain your friends forever. To the audience, before you are a group of amazingly talented leaders who obviously enjoy the exhilarating and rejuvenating exercise of civic engagement and the offering of their continued public service. To the host, a special thank you to Watchmen Ministries for this public service. All the best to you all. Mike Bauer, Harrison, Idaho. So let's begin with the first question. We'll start with Mrs. Edmondson. What is your plan to increase morale and retention in the department?
Well, morale and retention are definitely two very important issues, and although sometimes they're combined and similar, they're also two issues that you can look at as individuals. As far as retention goes, some of the things that we're really needing to work on are the retention of the more seasoned members of our agency that we have. The seasoned members are suffering from years of not receiving any wage increases along the way. They've been frozen in wages for a number of years until very recently. And so that's one area that we need to work on, and a plan that I would have is to work closely with the commissioners to be able to develop a pay plan that would address some kind of either COLA increases that we could depend upon in the future for those folks that are seasoned to keep them when they reach to that top of the scale in their pay structure. They would continue with an increase. As far as morale goes, I think that would help with some of the morale issues. I think that some of the things that we deal with are not valuing the employees and their ideas enough. We've spent a lot of time recruiting from a lot of other agencies and a lot of veterans that have joined our organization. And I think that we really need to start looking towards those people and the good ideas that they have, experiences that they've had in their prior positions, and look at some of those to bring on to our organization. So I'm very open to new ideas, new ways of doing things, and that's something that I would look at, and I hope that would improve morale.
Thank you. Mr. Grimm, same question.
Thank you. I pride myself on having long-term employees, and many of the questions or many of the concerns I've heard from employees of the Sheriff's Office I view as low-hanging fruit. Some of the simple things, there are certain immutable facts about us as human beings and how we relate to our employers, and employees want to be valued, they want to be appreciated, and most importantly, they want to know that they are part of a team that has a common goal, and whatever that agency or organization's goal might be. In this case, it's to serve and protect the citizens of Kootenai County. I'm going to be honest with you. I am not, I do not subscribe to the fact that monetary incentive solves morale. If anything, it is a temporary problem, a temporary solution to a permanent problem. And regardless of what side of the current COVID-19 issue you fall on, I think we can all agree that we are facing uncertain economic times, and the new sheriff is going to have to deal with what is likely to be a major cut in budget, because the citizens of Kootenai County are simply not going to be able to afford an increase in property tax. And I offer you proof in an email that we requested through public records where a deputy said those exact words. He said, the problems, people will tell you that we're leaving over money, and I assure you those are the minority. People are leaving, deputies are leaving over the, how did he say it, the organization, or the culture of the department. That was the word he used. That deputy now works for Coeur d'Alene Police. He made good on his word. He left, and he left for just a tiny bit more money and no take-home car, which is worth a substantial amount. So, thank you.
Mr. Norris, your answer, please.
Well, as you may or may not know, all 4 candidates, we had a series of interviews and forums with the Kootenai County Deputy Sheriff Association. And by an overwhelming vote, I won, and I earned their endorsement. And part of my platform in those forums was that we need to change the culture at the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office from a culture of managers who manage and oversee a process to a culture of leaders who protect and inspire the deputies and the professional staff who are out there working, doing the work. Yes, there was a former deputy. He had about 10 years on the organization. In fact, it was the sheriff's own son. He wrote an email that's widely been distributed and stated, yes, I'm leaving the organization, but it's not because of pay. It's because we need to change the culture. He has since endorsed me, and I have Brad Wolfinger's endorsement. So what we need to do is we need to change the culture at the sheriff's office from a culture of managers to a culture of leaders.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your answer, please.
As a leadership expert per se, as I'm recognized, I teach leadership and design leadership programs for agencies. Two in the North Idaho area use programs I designed specifically for them. So I know a little bit about leadership. And the first thing is, people do not quit jobs, they quit bosses. Money is usually fourth or fifth down the list until the money gets so disparate that they're so far out of the ballpark it becomes number one on the list. I think we are in the ballpark. I think the first point is where we're missing it. As human beings, we have an intrinsic need to feel part of something bigger than ourselves. And usually that is our work. And in law enforcement, that is ever more true. It is very important today and going into the future times, which are going to be very economically troubling with our current status, to ensure that the employees feel that they are truly valued for the service that they provide. My life and leadership philosophy is to treat others as I would want to be treated in like circumstances. And I think if that starts at the top and goes all the way through the agency, regardless of whether you're a deputy, a detention officer, a clerk, somebody getting arrested, coming in for a permit, if you feel like you're being treated the way you would treat them in like circumstances, you cannot go wrong. And that is my leadership philosophy and one I will instill at the Sheriff's Office.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Let's move on to the next question. Mr. Grimm, what are the major features of your plan to reduce crime?
One of the major features of my plan to reduce crime is to increase staffing. And it's no secret that the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office is severely understaffed. In speaking specifically about the jail, when you look at what Bonner County and their average daily population and the size of the teams they use compared to Kootenai County, the size of the teams we use with an average daily population of around 300 inmates, it's by the grace of God that we haven't had an issue yet. When you have 11 people working in the jail and a combative arrestee comes in, and that takes 5 deputies, and you've got 1 in the hospital pod, that doesn't leave many to cover the rest of the jail. And I think from a business standpoint, I look at that and I cringe at the possible financial liability that could head our way. But more to your question, my plan is to rebuild one of them at the least impactful on your pocketbook is to rebuild the reserve deputy program. Reserves provide a valuable service to the community in that we can utilize the resources of your sheriff's office more efficiently by running 2-man cars and putting more than 4 or 6 deputies on the street at any one time.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Norris, your answer, please.
Yes, so when you say the question, how do you reduce crime? There's a couple different ways you can look at crime. So crime in a crime series, such as a daytime burglary problem in Black Rock, or crime as far as we're having a bunch of grand thefts along Sherman Avenue. Let's go for the purpose of this particular scenario that it's a crime series where here in Coeur d'Alene Place, there's a daytime burglary problem. What I would do tomorrow is I would evaluate our resources that are currently on these task force that we have throughout this county. And I would make a crime impact team that would have 2 deputies from Kootenai County, 2 officers from Coeur d'Alene, 1 from Rathdrum, 1 from Spirit Lake. And anywhere and everywhere in this county, we would have a rotating sergeant between the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office and the Coeur d'Alene Police Department. And wherever the problems were, whether it was a daytime burglary problem in Black Rock, or whether it was a daytime burglary problem in Coeur d'Alene, or if it was a nighttime issue on Sherman. I've done these before. I have implemented these teams before, and I've worked them, supervised them, and I've managed them. That's how you reduce crime in a community, because generally, crime series such as that can be addressed through proactive law enforcement. And I have done that on several occasions.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your answer, please.
The easiest way to reduce crime is visibility. Staffing is one issue. However, we just talked about in the last question the uncertain future of our economic times. So staffing may not be an issue. Visibility is the easiest deterrent to crime, just like having a street light on a dark street helps deter crime because it's lit up. The sheriff's deputies already have take-home cars. I would expand the use of the take-home cars to where deputies could use those for their off-duty purposes, whether it's going to the gym or a grocery store run, something like that, to where there is more visible police vehicles on the street. I've worked with agencies previously that have employed the same tactics, and when the reality is there are 6 working police officers on the street, when you ask the citizens how many they think they're working, it's 5 or 6 times that many because they see cars moving around. The bad guys don't look inside the cars to see whether the person's in uniform or not. Police officers are police officers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if necessity arises. So if our cars are moving about, that's a very, very low financial impact to expand the use of the take-home cars. And then, of course, expand volunteers and those other services. And then staffing when and if our economic times can absorb that.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mrs. Edmondson, your answer, please.
Thank you. You know, we're lacking in some technologies that could help us be more efficient, and that would help us to have some more manpower. Some of the technologies that are available are different crime dashboards that work with the software that we use to dispatch calls. We can look towards intelligent lead policing, which is a current trend for some areas. That can also help us be a little bit more proactive. Technology is an area where we suffer in the organization. We don't take advantage of, and a lot of that is because of cost, but we don't take a lot of advantage of those things that can help us be more efficient. If you are more efficient with your time, you have more time to spend on other things to be more proactive in looking for crime. But I do agree that there is a lot of value for visibility. Some of the things that I think we need to work on are building the volunteer programs that we do have. The volunteer programs could include the COPS program, where we do have civilians that are working out in patrol vehicles. They go through a Citizens Academy training. Our reserve program has been defunct for a number of years, and that is something that I think is really important that we bring back on board in the future. And I also want to increase the number of neighborhood block watches that we have out in the outlying areas of the county. And I think that that also helps as far as visibility goes. When we've got neighborhoods that are part of, the enforcement for us, that's just another tool that we can use and will help us to reduce crime in the future.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Norris, in terms of current practices at the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office, please provide one that you would keep and one that you would get rid of, and why.
Well, there is one practice. There's one practice that I believe there's a lot of value, and that is the take-home card. There is high visibility in that, and I think that there's a lot of value to the community for that. There is a crime suppression aspect to that. One that I would get rid of or improve on is we have no community safety plan with the community near the Kootenai County Jail. We are in 2020, and it is very common to incorporate a community safety plan in the event that there's an inmate escape or a critical incident at that particular jail. We need to organize with the community, and we need to organize with our partnering police departments. So in the event that we do have an escape, or in the event that we do have a fire, that they know exactly what to do, and they know exactly where to go. And we need to train on this, and we need to develop a whole community safety plan that's incorporated into an inmate escape plan. There is no such plan at the Kootenai County Jail for this right now. Other communities have suffered because they did not have a community safety plan incorporated into their inmate escape policy. We can learn from other communities. We don't have to learn the hard way by somebody getting hurt or killed. We can do that beforehand and take a proactive approach instead of a reactive approach.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your answer, please.
The program I would first work to get away from would be the sheriff's office issuing state driver's licenses. I would work with our local representatives, senators, as well as the Sheriff's Association in the state to have the state absorb a function that is their function that the sheriff's office is doing for them and losing money on. We're the only state left in the union that does that, and I can see how it started, but we've long since grown past the need for the sheriff's office to be issuing driver's licenses. It's a state function. That would be the biggest and first thing I would work to move away from. Since I mentioned the take-home cars on my last question, I'll use it as one of the programs I will keep. When I went to the Leadership and Command College, I wrote a white paper on researching the use of take-home cars and their feasibility. The research that I conducted and wrote my white paper on proved out that take-home cars are very cost-effective and beneficial to not only the agency, the community, and the individual officers that have a car. The longevity of the car, the maintenance on the car, the longevity is much longer, the maintenance is much lower, the cars look better longer, they're treated better, and you have the visibility impact that I used in my last question. And that's one question I get a lot in my Zoom forums is, what about take-home cars? Many people don't understand, they just see the cost. The biggest cost is starting the program. After the program started and we're well into it, the cost is minimal to maintain, and the benefits way outweigh the detractors.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mrs. Edmondson, your answer, please.
Well, Rick took one of my answers on the driver's license, so I'll change it up a little bit, but that was a good response. As far as one of the things that I would get rid of, I guess, is it's a little bit of the opposite of that. It's something that we don't currently do that I would bring on board. So it's something, as far as our evaluations, we don't do performance evaluations consistently across the agency as we used to, and I think that there's a way that we could improve on the old ways that we did do things, but right now we've got some parts of our organization that don't do performance evaluations on their employees, and then other areas that do them differently, and I think that that's something that really needs to be changed, and so it's not necessarily something that I'd be bringing or getting rid of, as it is that I'd be bringing it back. Something that exists that I would want to keep and improve on even is our on-duty workout. Right now, the policy allows for some of the members to be able to work out while they're on duty, especially for patrol, and detention is starting to be able to take advantage of that, but I think that that speaks towards officer wellness and employee wellness, and I think we really need to expand on our employee wellness programs, and so getting everybody the opportunity, all of our first responders, to be fit is important, and that workout opportunity is important for their wellness as well. That would just be a first step in the process of improving wellness programs for our employees in the future.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Grimm, your answer, please.
Yes, being last, like I said, Kim, many touched on the same subject. I agree with the take-home car issue is a big deal. I've said from the beginning that that's an important aspect of an important perk. One thing we are missing, though, is, there's no 24-hour daycare here in the county. And when somebody has young children that need to be looked after, they sometimes are faced with limited resources, and I've had detention deputies tell me that's one of the major concerns they have is having a safe place where they can have their kids taken care of. I'm going to keep the driver's license office, but remove the inefficiency. I don't think the solution is to turn, the solution for the sheriff's office, it might benefit the sheriff's office to remove that to the state, but it certainly won't benefit you. Turning over an inefficient organization or operation to another bureaucracy that is 8 hours away is not the solution to solve that problem. I can solve the issue with the driver's license office.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Whitehead, what can the sheriff do to increase funding for the department to implement your plans?
Another area to which I have a track record of experience, education is the biggest key. In the 90s, Travis County faced the exact same things that Kootenai County faced today. A revolving door of being a training agency for all the agencies around us, and the constant attrition. I became the leader of a team that worked directly with our county commissioners, of which we had 5, in explaining to the county commissioners the plight of the sheriff's office, also listening to the commissioners as to how the county dollars are allocated and the priorities. So they got to understand our position, we got to understand their position. And then I went into the community and I met with every feasible neighborhood association group and civic group I could find and helped them understand the plight of the sheriff's office. Then those citizens groups came with me to the commissioner's court for the budget hearing. And in a room about the size of this auditorium was standing room only with citizens and lined up out the door and down the sidewalk to speak to the commissioners on behalf of the sheriff's office. So the crux of it is education and helping the citizens know the services that the sheriff's office provides, what it needs to provide those services that they require and expect, and then educating them on the needs of the office and employing their help in convincing the commissioners who oversee the budget in allocating the funds correctly.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mrs. Edmondson, your answer, please.
Funding is always an issue. It's something that I've seen a struggle with consistently for every budget year I've been involved in. And, there are a lot of different ways. Every county doesn't operate the same way. In the 44 counties of Idaho, you probably have 44 different ways to budget. And our budget process changes from year to year. And so does the ideology on what the budget process is going to be each year. So it's something that I think, we need to come up with a solution that's going to be something that can, go beyond that year-to-year change and something that could be very consistent. I'm a proponent for impact fees. I think that when we look at funding, we need to look at, especially during all of the years that we've had of growth, we've missed out on a lot of opportunities. Impact fees could have provided a lot of, infrastructure to us, a lot of capital items. I think that we also need to look at increasing fees where those areas to increase are available, so that by law, we're allowed to charge certain amounts for certain services that we provide. If there's room to increase those services, we need to look at doing that. We have done that recently and in some areas, but I think to do that consistently in all areas where we can increase fees would help us to provide some of the services that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Grimm, your answer, please.
I think probably where I differ coming from the private sector is every mistake I make in my business, budgetary-wise, costs me at the end of the year, and as such, I am frugal to the point of being penurious when it comes to dealing and making expenditures. We've got a $100 million budget last year, and on top of that, a $5 million lawsuit that the county is facing. The only place I would agree to raise taxes on the public would be through impact fees. But I have to think, how many times have you heard the latest property tax increase being sold as, it's only $5 a week, or it's only a cost of a latte? And that might be something that many of us can absorb, but I think about the widow. You know, the one that she's owned her house outright for a number of years. Her husband may have passed away. She doesn't even pay her bills online. She writes a check every year for that property tax. And to her, $250 is real money. No, sitting through the sheriff's budgets last year, I got to tell you, I wanted to bang my head against the wall when I left there. They are tremendously inefficient, the meetings in general. And the way that the minimum number of $10,000 is tossed around so cavalierly, it makes somebody from private industry, I look at that and I think, I can find inefficiencies so quickly. Our jail overtime budget alone last year went over by $553,000. The first thing we need to do is get serious about hiring. Get that help wanted sign off the back fence and staff accordingly, because if we spend money on salaries, we're not spending time and a half on the budget, or excuse me, on overtime. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Norris, your answer, please.
Part of my platform to the public and to the organization is to do a top-to-bottom evaluation of the organization, to find those inefficiencies and to find waste. And when we go and talk to these unit of assignments, I'm going to go talk to them without any sergeants, lieutenants, or captains present. And I want to know how we can make that organization or that unit more efficient. And I'm going to do that through the ranks. We're also going to go to sergeants, and we're going to talk to them separately to see how we can make that unit more efficient, and so on and so on. I, too, am a fan of impact fees. It's not fair that residents who've lived here all their life and all of a sudden they have to pay more fees because this influx of people moving in. I don't think that's fair. I think that impact fees absolutely are appropriate. And what we need to do is we need to stop having a conversation with the Board of Commissioners on how much people make. This is about public safety. And we don't need 4 patrol officers on duty that have less than 1 year on. We currently have a training officer that has less than 2 years on. And those are warning signs that we should all heed. That is very significant. I didn't feel comfortable in a patrol car until I had 3 years of confident, everyday working that you know what, I feel confident I can handle any call that comes out there. So we need to reduce that tenure gap that is so small right now, and we need to retain people because it's because of public safety. It's not because Coeur d'Alene makes so much. It's not because of Spokane. So whatever we need to do to convince the Board of Commissioners that this has to do with public safety is very, very important for us to do that. It has nothing to do with what Spokane makes or Coeur d'Alene makes. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mrs. Edmondson, next question. If you were in support of Second Amendment rights, specifically, how would you defend them for Kootenai County citizens?
Well, I am in support of Second Amendment rights, and, you know, the oath that a sheriff takes, you know, upon being sworn into position is to uphold the Constitution and to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of Idaho. And so basically that is the way I will support those rights, because that's encapsulated in the entire Constitution for both the state and the country.
Mr. Grimm, same question.
I am a staunch defender of all of the rights enumerated and protected by the Bill of Rights and in our Constitution. In 2015, the Veterans Administration came and there was an issue up in Bonner County, and they wanted to confiscate the firearms of an individual without due process. And Sheriff Darrell Wheeler, and then Under Sheriff at that time, Lieutenant Roy Lakewald, went, and with a group of other people, but those were the 2 men primarily responsible for what happened that day, stood in the gap between the bureaucrats and the citizen of their county that they protected. And the issue's gone away. They ran them off. There was no violence. There was no nothing. That's how I would handle a situation like that. In Idaho, gun confiscation is protected in our Constitution. And additionally, I think it was, Governor Otter signed into law Senate Bill 1334, 1333, that allows for both civil and criminal penalties for anybody enforcing an illegal order. So in Idaho, we really have done some good things to protect our Second Amendment rights, and I support that.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Norris, your answer to the question.
There will be no gun confiscation in a Norris administration, period. Period. Why? Because it is against our constitutional rights, it is against due process, and communities that restrict guns don't turn out to be very nice places. And when you do restrict guns, you make criminals out of law-abiding citizens, and you decriminalize the bad guy. And I will not allow that to happen here in Kootenai County, period. I will insert myself between any agency that wants to take a gun from a law-abiding citizen all the time, every day. It will not happen here in Kootenai County.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead?
I am the constitutional candidate at the table. I have been very vocal and out front on that since the beginning of my campaign. I was locally beseeched for that in the paper. I was the lead speaker at the local pro-Second Amendment gun rally that was held in support of Virginia when they were going through their turmoil with their new elected representatives. I have a good friend in Darrell Wheeler, and him and I are in lockstep on how he handled the situation up there with the Veterans Administration. As sheriff, my job is to interpose myself between you as the citizen and any overreach of the government, whether it is Second Amendment or whether it's the EPA wanting to claim that your pond out in front of your house is now a wetlands. Any government overreach by the government is the sheriff's job to interpose himself between that, and that's what I would do.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mr. Grimm, next question. Transparency in government is becoming more and more important. In what ways would you increase transparency in the Sheriff's Department? And this could be either internally or externally.
The first thing I would do the very first day, if you go to the Kootenai County website, the business analyst has done a tremendous job of providing budgetary information in real time on the Kootenai County website, and I'll give a plug for that because it's kind of neat information. You go to under key performance indicators, bottom right-hand corner, you can see every elected official's real-time performance numbers, except for one, and that's the sheriff's office. And through public records requests, I found the email that where Sheriff Wolfinger did not want that information published. And in his defense, he does say that because of capital expenditures appearing in the beginning of the year, it might look like the budget is going to be exceeded. There's a solution for that also. But that's the first thing I would do to be transparent with the spending of your money, is to put that budget information online.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Norris, your answer, please.
Yes, any candidate up here can say they're going to be transparent, but there's only one candidate that has been transparent during this campaign. Anything that has ever been asked of me, any lies and false accusations that have been leveled at me, I have addressed, and I have put all real certified documents on my website. That is a true testimony on how you will run this sheriff's office, is how you run this campaign. I have told my supporters, do not participate in these types of allegations. Every allegation leveled against me, I have proven documentation to refute it, and it is on my website, and I will do the same thing with the sheriff's office. Absolute transparency.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your answer, please.
I wholeheartedly agree with the transparency of the budget and having that online for everybody to see how their tax dollars are being spent. But transparency does not stop with the budget. There's also accounts within the sheriff's office that are funded and are specifically authorized by the sheriff. I would also make those transparent. That has been one of the questions I've received during the campaign, is what about these accounts that are never audited? Those accounts would also be transparent because there are specific rules on how those can be used and is part of the $5 million lawsuit that's been alleged. But beyond budgetary matters, I would be transparent on every matter within the sheriff's office. If we make a mistake, then we own that mistake and we explain to you what went wrong, how it went wrong, and how we're going to learn from it, train for it, and fix it so it does not happen again. That's where agencies get in the biggest trouble, is when they try to hide their mistakes. And that's when they end up with civilian oversight boards. I don't think there's a large agency in this country today that does not have a civilian oversight board, and it's because they refuse to own their mistakes. So I would be completely transparent in not only our financial dealings, but also how we interact with the public for the good and when we make a mistake.
Mrs. Edmondson, your answer, please.
Yes, I agree with the online budget reports in all facets of any budgeting that we do, any expenditures that we have, and what our regular spending looks like in all of the different accounts we have. I think it's important for the community to see that we're accountable for how we spend and what our budgets look like on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's important that we are a part of all of the rest of the organizations in the county that are whose budgets are posted there. To not have it there would, as a regular citizen, create suspicion, and so I understand that. I think that it's also just as important for us to recognize that the public records laws in Idaho do provide for a lot of transparency, and that people have a lot of information that's available to them through the public records requests. So it's there's a lot of things that go on in the sheriff's organization, and so if we put all of that on, I'm afraid we'd probably tie up the bandwidth and break the internet if we had everything we do available. So certainly the public has access to a lot of information that they just need to ask for, and certainly in the cases that we can, we do provide that. It's very limited in the times that we can't.
Mr. Norris, next question. What would you consider are the practical applications of a constitutional sheriff?
Well, sorry about that.
No worries.
I believe that preserving your constitutional rights. If we go back to what the sheriff original responsibility was, when you take Shire and Reef, then that's our common day sheriff, is that it was really to prevent other lords from other areas coming and imposing their will on the residents of that particular area, that shire or that county. So preserving your rights from our modern day rights as it pertains to freedom of religion, as it pertains to the Second Amendment, and also the Fourth Amendment. Protecting your rights is crucial, and it's a crucial, absolute crucial part of being a sheriff. Look at what is happening in Virginia right now. 20 years ago, they didn't think they were ever going to see what they see today. And it is an assault on your constitutional rights. And absolutely, preserving your constitutional rights is an important role as a sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead?
The job of a constitutional sheriff, as I previously mentioned, and want to reiterate, is to interpose myself, between the citizen and any government overreach. And to speak specifically to that point, this auditorium is empty today because of the current lockdown order that is in place from our governor that violates the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Article 1, Section 4 of the Idaho Constitution to freely gather and worship as you please. I fully support the government telling us, here is a danger, here is the precautions we suggest you take, and then it is up to me and my family to determine what is safe for us, as it is up to you to determine what is safe for you. The government does not have the right to decide which businesses are essential and which ones are not. Those are our dollars out of our pockets that determine that. If in our anti-social distancing a restaurant fails because not enough people attend it, then that's the free market system. But to fail that restaurant because of a government order is wrong. And as sheriff, I would not be enforcing this order. I would be joining Sheriff Wheeler in that. I would be joining Prosecutor Boyd out of Adams County in that, other local representatives and other sheriffs across this country, that our current order is unconstitutional. Give us the precautions, but we have the liberty to decide how those work for us. That's how a constitutional sheriff works.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mrs. Edmondson, same question?
Yes. Again, I go back to what I said earlier about how important the oath of office is for a sheriff. And I go back to my childhood. I was a Brownie. I was a Girl Scout, a Boy Scout. And I was in 4-H. I was an FFA. I'm a Rotarian now. All of those things, and including the job that I've had now for over 28 years in this community, the one thing that they all have in common is an oath. You know, as a Brownie, as a Girl Scout, as a 4-H member, an FFA, and as a sheriff's deputy, I've taken an oath at everyone, and as a Rotarian. Those oaths are very meaningful. They drive who you are. They give you direction. They talk about purpose and value, and I believe that's what the oath of the sheriff's office does. Every time we swear in a new employee, I'm full of pride hearing them take the oath to their new position, and that talks about, again, the Constitution, upholding the Constitution and the laws of the state of Idaho. Those words are transcendent. You know, they're important to me. They're in my heart. They're how I will lead this organization, and so it is truly about the oath we take.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Grimm, your answer, please.
I want to touch briefly on what Captain Edmondson just said. I agree with her that an oath is something that we should take very serious. And a man is only as good as his word. And to me, my word is sacred. When I tell you I'm going to do something, I will do it. Supporting the U.S. Constitution is also something that I hold sacred, and it's not something new to me. I've supported the Constitution since as long as I can remember, and more importantly, I support constitutionally minded candidates, and I'm on record with my financial donations to the same. One thing that I took as a compliment from actually an opponent's supporter, and it was a compliment, he said, "Grimm won't always tell you what you want to hear." And this is where I'm not going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. It's easy to say, yeah, we elected a constitutional sheriff and we're done. No, I would encourage you all, if you can't name 5 Idaho legislators, 3 district court judges, get involved, because we can't rest. I will defend your constitutional rights, but we can't do what Virginia did and allow these people to get into office and say, what happened? Because I guarantee you, if you go back in the history of every one of those people that was elected in Virginia, you will find a moderate Republican, or worse, somebody who was a lifelong Democrat before that, recently converted, possibly for under the guise of being a constitutionally minded person. So that's the part I think it's very critical that we educate ourselves and truly become informed voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Whitehead, next question. Is there anything the sheriff can do to stop the prison reentry center from being built in Kootenai County?
Not directly, other than the same as a citizen in voicing an opinion. I have voiced my opinion for a variety of reasons, and not to belabor the point about statistics on recidivism, whether it's 35% or 85%, irregardless, I have voiced my opinion based a lot on Kootenai County is a bedroom community. Our population grows at 3% a year. Our jobs grow at less than 1% a year. People come here as a destination, and largely the retiree community comes here as a destination. We are a bedroom community. There's been at least 2 articles recently in the newspaper discussing how expensive the housing is. So purely based off of the cost of the housing and the lack of jobs, the reentry center is not a good fit. And I have voiced that opinion, and that's the only say the sheriff has, is voicing the opinion. If it does come, then whatever that recidivism is, the sheriff's department's going to have to grow with it to fight that crime. It is not a good fit, and that's how it works.
Mrs. Edmondson, your answer, please?
Yeah, I agree. There's not directly, is there anything that a sheriff can do to stop that process from occurring, but certainly indirectly, there are a lot of things I think that as sheriff I would be involved in, going to the different city councils and recommending that they do resolutions as they've been working on the county as well. I think that it's really important to be a strong voice, and that would be either in support of something that your constituents believe in or in opposition of those things they don't. So those are, very important for the sheriff to know how they can, affect the community in that kind of a manner in an indirect nature. So does the sheriff have the authority to say, no, that can't be built here? No, the sheriff does not. But I think there's a lot of room for us to be able to make a little bit of noise.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Grimm, your answer, please?
Realistically, no, the sheriff cannot prevent the reentry center from happening. He can have a tremendous amount of influence on it, though. And I want to be clear. I was the first sheriff's candidate to come out publicly against the reentry center, for the simple fact that the Idaho Department of Corrections is demonstrably unable to properly administer this type of organization or this type of facility just by looking at how poorly they've performed in the past with scandal after scandal inside the organization. It's really, really a mess. I don't have, how do I phrase this? I have a tremendous amount of compassion for my fellow human. And if somebody wants to get their mind right and proceed down the correct path, to that person I say, welcome home. But let's be clear, this is not a parole. This is pre-parole, and that's where the rub is. The idea that the head of the Idaho Department of Corrections can circumvent our local judge's sentencing authority by releasing somebody early is a big problem for me. And it is merely a cost-shifting measure by Boise to make us have to deal with their budget mismanagement in the prison system. And I would work hard to try and put pressure through community education programs, but really that's where it stops with the authority of the sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Norris, your answer, please?
Can you repeat the question, just regarding wording? Go ahead.
Sure. Is there anything the sheriff can do to stop the prison reentry center from being built in Kootenai County?
Is there anything that he or she can do? Yes, there is. It's called a fiscal impact analysis, and I've done many of them on large projects or facilities at risk that can have a conversation on what type of crime, what type of lower quality of life that this particular project is going to bring to our community. As of right now, the state wants to dump 130 inmates and have them released into our community and go to different jobs and what have you. Well, everybody knows, and statistics show us, that the first year of an individual's release from prison is generally your highest rate of recidivism. And then if they can make that first year, it generally goes lower and lower. So this is going to cost us more money. This is going to cost us more in law enforcement services. And we're going to need more deputies to police these 130 felony inmates that want to come and go into these job programs here in Kootenai County. So yes, let's educate the city councils, the board of commissioners, that this is going to cost a lot of money to bring this or any large project. Because for every 1,000 people, we're going to need 3 new jail beds. And let's have that conversation before the development, not afterwards saying, hey, you know what, I need 300 more beds because of all this development that's going on. let's have that conversation before, not after.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mrs. Edmondson, next question to you. Given how polarizing the current political environment is, why are you running for sheriff?
Wonderful question. Thank you. Again, I go back to the local leadership part and how long I've been in the community and in the organization. And because of that, I understand the culture of both, the culture of our community and the culture of the organization. And I understand certainly why people are moving here. Who doesn't want to live here, right? It's a beautiful area, and everything about who we are in this community is very important to me, and the reason why I want to stay and why I haven't gone anywhere else. So I know we need to change. I know that there are things that we need to do to improve our agency and take it into the future. I want those things to happen with respect to both the community and to the organization. I don't want it to just be changed off the face of a cliff just for the sake of change. I think that it all needs to be very thoughtful and respectful to both the community and to the organization. And so that's why I'm running. Those things are really important to me. I've invested a lot in the organization, and as a citizen of Kootenai County, I want to see those changes happen the best way, the right way, and that's why I'm running.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Grimm, your answer, please.
Thank you. For the past nearly 2 decades, we've heard the same problems coming out of the sheriff's office, and not just the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. This is a problem that faces sheriff's offices nationwide with staffing and budgetary issues. And it's something I've thought about, and about 18 months ago, Sarah and I were talking, and let me back up a little bit. In the past, I've backed other candidates and supported them. I backed Sheriff Wolfinger in 2016. And quite honestly, that's a lot less money and a lot easier to do that. And this time, Sarah and I were talking about it. I said, I'm going to see how this race shapes up, and I may throw my hat in the ring. And after research and meeting with candidates, I decided that I think I'm better suited for what's important, to address what's important to us here in North Idaho. It takes at least 5 years to develop a social network in this area. I moved here for a reason, and I don't want to see things change from our lifestyle. And we have friends from Harrison to Spirit Lake, and they all have a unique, there's many, many unique subcultures here in North Idaho, and it takes some length of time to quite properly understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Norris, your answer, please.
Well, several years ago, I was driving around our beautiful county, and I'm driving down some streets, and I see many, many, many multifamily unit dwellings that are popping up everywhere. It's the new crop in Kootenai County. And then I do some public records request on some of the major retailers here and see how much time that we're spending at some of the major retailers here that everybody here in this room are subsidizing as far as their security. And then fast forward a few months, and then the IDOC is considering putting this prison release center in here. And I thought, my gosh, when you look at your tax bill now, you've got school levies and public construction levies and all kinds of levies. This place is starting to look like California. If we don't start doing something right now, we're at a very, very precarious point where we are going to conform and continue to look more like California, or we need to do something right now. We need to bring these fiscal impact analysis studies forward to our elected officials to say, hey, if this multifamily unit dwelling is going to go in over here, we're going to need, per every 250 units, we're going to need 3 more jail beds. We're going to need more patrol services. And our taxes are going to go higher and higher. So I couldn't let this place do that.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your answer, please.
We discovered Idaho late in our career and then moved here in 2011 to semi-retire and run my training company. During the last sheriff election, I was encouraged by local citizens and law enforcement to run for sheriff. and that was the first time the thought had ever crossed my mind. But I didn't have any bones to pick with Sheriff Wolfinger and consider us professional friends, so I wasn't going to do that. And then for this race in early 2018, I had coffee with the sheriff, and he said he wasn't running again. I was being encouraged again by local law enforcement and citizens, and that's when I decided I would get into this race. I have the career, the skills, and the experience for the critical times that we currently face. And in making that decision, realizing that my personal life would be exposed, which has been rather colorful to say the least. But while I've had personal struggles in my life, my career has been stellar. And in these critical times, experience counts. And I have the proven track record of dealing with the issues we face. And that's why I decided to get in this race.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Next question to Mr. Grimm. Sex trafficking is the fastest growing crime in the world. What can the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office do to combat this horrific crime?
You know, I've been recently made aware of a route that travels, and I do not have the ability to properly research this at this time, but I've been recently made aware from a close friend in Washington about a route that possibly exists, sex trafficking route from Canada down across Highway 53 and down in through Washington State. And I previously was unaware of that. This is a horrific crime that needs to be dealt with swiftly and severely. Right now, with chronic understaffing, the lack of investigative ability and resources, I think it's a difficult task for the Sheriff's Office. But adding to that, the concept of possibly alienating help from federal officials, including the FBI, that have the resources to help with interstate trafficking issues like that, I think is a mistake. I think the sheriff needs to embrace a working relationship with all agencies around him and to put forth the idea that there are certain agencies that are going to be disallowed in the county for various reasons. I think it's dangerous when it comes to serving you, the citizens of the county.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Norris, your answer, please.
We are currently at risk for that activity right here, right now. Our community is changing, whether we want it to or not. I don't want to be the elephant in the room, but these massage parlors that are popping up everywhere, that are open till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, before the COVID-19, of course. I've worked morals before. So morals is a vice division where you seek out violations of the law as it pertains to morality and what have you. So we are having these issues right here, right now in Kootenai County. These massage parlors that are popping up everywhere in Kootenai County are at high risk for this type of activity. And what I said before, as far as forming a crime series team to address these types of issues, whatever the issue is, if it's a daytime burglary problem, if it's a robbery problem, or if it's a trafficking problem, we're going to address that. And it's happening right here, right now. And that team that I talked about would absolutely be there to resolve those issues also.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your answer, please.
It is a issue. We have at least two major routes running through our county, 95 and 90, that traffic not only people but drugs and other things. Part of the solution is training, that officers, deputies know what to be looking for in those type situations, as well as what questions to ask to occupants of vehicles, interacting in the public, as well as incorporating intelligence sharing between multiple agencies, including federal, that all have various resources to bring to bear in intelligence on that type of activity. It also takes place on the internet with solicitation. So it's a big spider web that multiple agencies have to be involved in and share information on. And massage parlors are just one part of that spider web that have an indication of that activity. But it's a training issue that to know what to look for, what to ask, and then have the resources to bring to bear.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mrs. Edmondson, your answer, please.
Yes, I agree. From the street level, it starts with education and knowing what to look for, what questions to ask. I think that's very important. And also from the investigative side, we have done in the past and we would continue in the future to do undercover operations that would be task forces made up of many agencies, and having a multi-agency response is really important because it gives you a lot of different abilities in the investigation, especially when it comes to jurisdiction. And so our federal partners are wonderful to work with. We've worked with them over the years. I've developed relationships with the local law enforcement and federal law enforcement agencies in the area over the course of the years that I've been involved, especially in investigations. And so those are really important to know that you can draw from those relationships, put those task forces together. Part of it's on the internet, part of it's in the infrastructure, whether it's the massage parlors, casino, motels, those types of things. And so those areas are really important. I think also we need to look at how we handle our runaway situations, and when we are encountering runaways, we need to ask questions that are pertinent as well as to what their current situation is, to see if some of those people are have been involved in any of the solicitation as well. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Norris, next question to you. What programs would you create or expand to increase positive community involvement in the Sheriff's Department?
Well, there are several, and thank you for that question. And thank you for allowing me to be first on that particular question, as fate would have it. So I'm going to have town hall meetings throughout this county, and I want to know and I want to hear what your concerns and what your issues and what your experiences have been with the Sheriff's Office. Because what your issues and concerns are will be our issues and concerns. I want to hear what's the residents in Hayden have to say, and I want to hear what they have to say in Harrison, and in Hauser Lake, and in Bayview, and in Athol. We are going to have a town hall meeting throughout this county. In addition to a town hall meeting, I'd like to have a conversation with the residents on implementing a town sheriff program. And a town sheriff program is a program that the town sheriff is just a deputy, another deputy that's out in the field, but he or she has responsibility for a particular geographical area. And they're their town sheriff for that particular community. So many times in law enforcement, 90% of your calls for service can be resolved pretty quickly. But those 10% of calls for service account for 90% of the time because you're going back to the same location or it's an ongoing dispute. That town sheriff is that perfect individual to be able to resolve those types of issues. We also want the town sheriff to know who's on probation and who's on parole in their community, and if they're getting the necessary help that they need. So we find that when we institute a town sheriff program and give them certain objectives, that they have a vested interest in the community, and that community has a vested interest in their town sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your answer, please.
Can you repeat the question, please?
What programs would you create or expand to increase positive community development in the Sheriff's Department?
What I'm doing currently, it's moving around the county having coffee with Rick, where I can hear from citizens at the various parts of the community as to what is working for them with the Sheriff's Department and what is not working with them or what they would like to see. That would continue once I'm sheriff. My door would always be open to the citizenry as to their concerns, good or bad. The resident deputy program that Bob just mentioned is an excellent program. And Kootenai County is primed to have a couple of resident deputies in the far reaches of the county. And not only the resident deputies working those areas of the county, but the other parts of the county having deputies consistently serve the same areas so that they know their community, what vehicles should be moving, what ones should not be moving, what people are familiar and which ones aren't familiar. It's the deputy knowing his area or her area and the citizens knowing their deputy and having that positive relationship. That also starts in the schools with the school resource officers. The DARE program back in the day was a great program. If for no other reason, it helped the kids see police officers as human beings. To expand the school resource officer program, to keep that going and start those relationships in the schools that then blossom out into the community.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mrs. Edmondson, your answer, please.
Yes, I also believe that the school resource officer program is something that we need to expand on, and where it affects people in the community positively is through our children. And that is extremely important to me and something that I want to be able to expand on in the future as well. I think that the children need to have very positive contacts. A lot of the school districts are bringing in programs like Sources of Strength. The cities have very strong school resource officer programs, but the county does not. And so I'd love to be able to partner with the schools that we do have in the county that are outside of the city limits and be able to have an officer in, at least to be able to share in the closest schools that they can, if not in every school, so that a child would know and have access to a person that they could trust, that source of strength for them. If that school district doesn't have the program, at least they'll have the deputy in place that would be that person that could provide that source of strength for the child. And that's an important thing for me. As far as the children's mental health issues in our community, I think it's important that we can start working towards finding, the kids that are in pre-crisis. Right now we deal with everybody when they're in crisis. And if we can work on the pre-crisis issues, that's very, the perfect time to be able to step in. And I believe those school resource officers are the front line for that, and they would be the best people to be able to manage that, and it would be a positive impact for the children.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Grimm, your answer, please.
Thank you. With the limited time, that this is something I've addressed on my website prior to this. At the risk of sounding redundant, the reserve deputy program provides a valuable role. There's two profiles of a reserve deputy. One, if there is the young fellow that past all his background would be qualified to hire, but there's no available positions. And so here's an opportunity for you to get to know this individual better as he volunteers his time with a full-time deputy sheriff. The other one is the 45-year-old dentist or other professional that now has time to give back to their community. And those are the people that we need to tap into because they are a great resource for communication between the sheriff's office, the sheriff's employees, and their friends that are members of the community. And the times that questions come up where somebody says, hey, I saw a sheriff's deputy do this and that, it's important to have somebody say, yeah, that may not necessarily be what happened. Let me give you an example of why he might have done that. And that goes a long way towards understanding. The other thing that I'll absolutely do is reestablish the Youth Explorer program. I think it was abolished in 2013. And that provides a tremendous opportunity for education. But what it also does is provide a recruiting tool. I'm going to start selling the idea of a career in law enforcement to area youth starting at 14 years old. That way you can keep tabs on these people, these young people, give them a goal in mind. I don't know about many people in the audience, but most kids at 16 don't know what their goals are in life. I certainly didn't. But if you set a goal, set an expectation for behavior, you can end up with people when they turn 21 or turn 18 that are valuable employees. And more important than that, getting to know somebody from a young age, if they do make the types of mistakes that sometimes are common in college, you can understand if this is a habitual problem or if this is just a one-time thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Whitehead, next question to you. In light of current circumstances, as sheriff, how would you defend your constituents in regards to an order given by either federal or state governments in which you believe is constitutionally questionable?
I would interpose myself between them and that agency, just like Sheriff Wheeler did in Bonner County when the Veterans Administration came to take the veterans' guns. That was based off of a policy of the Veterans Administration and not a law. Specifically in reference to the red flag laws or gun confiscation that we hit earlier, not only is that against our Constitution, but further in 2014, the Idaho legislature passed further legislation that prohibits any gun seizure, whether it be by a federal law or executive order or any other means. So as sheriff, I would interpose myself between the citizen and that government overreach.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mrs. Edmondson, your response, please.
Yes, could you reread the question, please?
In light of current circumstances, as sheriff, how would you defend your constituents in regards to an order given by either the federal or state governments which you believe is constitutionally questionable?
Can I just clarify? I think we both are on the same page. What do you mean by in light of current circumstances? Is that?
Well, no, but I just wanted to catch that last part, the constitutionally questionable. And to me, the words matter, and that word questionable means I don't know for certain. It means there's a possibility it could be, there's a possibility it couldn't be. And I think in any case like that, it's important to not just be reactive. You need to be smart. You need to take a step back. There's discretionary time, certainly in situations like that, where we have the opportunity to get all of the information, have the people, the legal teams that need to look into those, give advice, and they can determine whether it is or is not. But when it's questionable, I think that that's something that we need to be very cautious of because that's just something that, if I end up in federal prison over something that wasn't, that's going to be a bad thing. But I think that the sound's getting weird. But I think that maybe the intent is if I knew that it was a constitutional issue, and there was one of the questions that you had talked about that. And the issue then really it's not about enforcing the law, but upholding the Constitution when you know that to be the case. And then certainly I would stand between, the side of the Constitution is the law of the land, and that's very important to be able to respect. I think that's maybe the intent of the question, but hopefully that answers it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Grimm?
I too have some concerns with the vagueness of the question. Something questionable, yeah, I think it's a slippery slope. I want to be careful because I know there's people out there that want to hear the stock answer, no, I will not enforce an unconstitutional order, but I think that's a slippery slope because I trust myself to make those judgments, but I don't necessarily trust the next sheriff or the sheriff after that. And if you recall, Kootenai County has not always been the Republican stronghold that it is. In recent history, we've had Democrat sheriffs. But I can't give you an example of a specific situation that I have firsthand knowledge of because Darrell Wheeler told this story to me himself in his office one day. And it had to do with a census worker. And I'll try and go quick, but a neighborhood did not want census workers to come and administer their surveys in their area or in their cul-de-sac, and so they put up a barricade. And Darrell Wheeler received a phone call from the Census Administration, and the guy attempted to school him on what Idaho law says about peace officers, delivery people, and census workers' ability to transgress a no trespassing sign was. And Sheriff Wheeler told him, don't instruct me on Idaho law. And this dates back to a 2011 Supreme Court ruling, I think it was, or 2008 Idaho Supreme Court ruling. But Sheriff Wheeler said, don't school me on Idaho law. This isn't a no trespassing sign. This is a barricade. And if your agents cross that barricade, that locked gate again in my county, they will be subject to arrest. So that is one specific instance. But I'm not going to tell you, no, I'm not going to enforce any unconstitutional order, because you have to be specific. We have to be very, very careful when talking about things like that.
Mr. Norris, same question to you.
Yeah, so it's very difficult to answer this in 2 minutes, and there's a little bit of it's an abstract term. But let's talk about as it pertains to the COVID-19 issue, is what I think what the question refers to. No? Yes?
It certainly can be.
So I had a TS-SCI clearance. I feel pretty confident there's 2 people up here that would be able to obtain one of those clearances, and I believe pretty confident there's 2 that wouldn't be able to obtain those clearances. But let's just say that this was and I've been involved in a task force to investigate bio-events, whether it was an intentional or unintentional act, as it pertains to measles, tuberculosis, and those types of things, for germ warfare after 9/11 and what have you. So let's just say there is some classified information that the president has that we don't deem anything that comes out of China credible. And maybe that this particular virus was a accidental, intentional or unintentional release, and that maybe this was a precursor to an event that China is going to have as far as an active war with the United States or somewhere else. So do I believe at the beginning of this event that it was prudent to protect public health to do what we did? Yes. Do I believe we know a lot more about the virus now, that we can put safety measures in place to protect the public health? Yes, I do. So it's a very, very complex question. And so it depends on what the intent of what government is trying to do. If you're trying to take your guns away just because we don't want you to have guns, then guess what? I don't like it at all. But what if there was intelligence information that this was an intentional act and that this was germ warfare, and they wanted to see how effective it would have been? So it's a very complex question.
Yes, it certainly was a complex question, and you all handled it very well. Thank you. Next question to Mrs. Edmondson. The surging growth in Kootenai County seems to be a concern of both citizens and candidates. Do you think the sheriff has any direct control over growth? If not, what would be your specific concerns and plans to deal with this growth?
Yeah, I don't think that there's any, again, like the other question that was similar, I don't think there's a direct way that the sheriff can stop growth here. I think that we can be involved certainly in a lot of different manners as far as planning goes with the city councils. But I think that really when we're talking about growth, some of the important things is how can growth benefit us in some ways. And again, I think impact fees are a good way to be able to generate funding. This is a beautiful area. People are going to continue to move here, and it's not like we can just put a gate down on the freeway and say, stop, turn around, go back, we're full. I've seen the memes on the internet, and they are funny, but it's an impossibility. So people will continue to move here. How can we do that smartly, and how can we impress upon the decision makers who do have direct impact in that to make good choices and have at least have a voice in that area? I think that is an important thing for a sheriff to do. It's something that I would do, certainly. And but again, taking advantage of the opportunities for impact fees would definitely be something that I would want to do in the future as we continue to grow, because we've missed the boat on that for so long. We need to do some catching up. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Grimm, your answer, please.
I don't think directly there's anything the sheriff can do other than to try and, as Captain Edmondson said, influence and work with county commissioners or city council members. I am a proponent of impact fees. It seems like we are growing without a responsible plan in place. So I think the first thing that the sheriff needs to be vocal on is to explain the impact of building housing tract after housing tract. This experiment has been done in county and after county. You look at Aurora, Colorado, you look at the San Fernando Valley in Southern California. Everywhere there's a suburban bedroom community built with no other infrastructure like industrial, light industrial, manufacturing. After 20 years, the property tax base simply does not support law enforcement, schools, and otherwise. And this is a short-sighted problem we have here in Kootenai County, and I would like to help to work to change that. But having said that, if we believe in private property rights, we got to be very careful in discriminating against people that can't afford to buy a single-family home. I know that high-density housing is an issue here, and if it's done right, I think it can be done properly. But I don't want to treat anybody that cannot afford to own a $700,000 or $800,000 mansion in Kootenai County as a second-class citizen. My stepdaughter and my son live, not together, of course, but in separate apartments. So I think a professional sheriff dealing directly with the city councils and the county commissioners can make a lot of inroads, but he can't prevent it.
Mr. Norris, your answer, please.
As you know, part of my platform is irresponsible growth. As a former police chief of law enforcement services for 3 cities, I have completed fiscal analysis reviews on what type of impact a large development is going to have in a community. And those numbers that I expressed in an earlier answer were Kootenai County numbers. It costs about $100 a day, about $36,000 a year to house an inmate. To make that new bed, I've got statistics anywhere from about $68,000 to $90,000 based on our last expansion. These large multi-family unit dwellings, I'm not against. What I'm saying, it's time to have a conversation on how much these are going to eventually cost us 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And that's the purpose of a fiscal impact analysis, is how much is this going to cost us 2 or 3 years from now? That's why we're starting to have this conversation, because this place is starting to look like places like California that many of us fled from. And if you've looked at your tax bill and you've seen these school levies, every school, every infrastructure sector in Kootenai County is being stressed. It's time for a conversation on this aggressive growth agenda. That's all I'm saying. Single-family residents generally are healthy for a community. And a good balance of high-density housing is good for a community. But these 3 and 4, 5-bedroom apartment or story apartment complexes have demonstrated in other communities not to be healthy. I walked the Winco area. People around this town call that area felony flats. Law enforcement knows that as felony flats. And people that live there said, you know what? I used to leave everything out in my front yard. Now, since they built that complex, I can't leave anything in my front yard. So it's a conversation that I'd like to have with political leaders.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your answer, please.
Directly, the sheriff, no. Indirectly, yes. The office needs to be at the table when these decisions are being made to describe the impacts that the different decisions will cause. If you bring in this type of housing, you can expect this type of result, and I will need this type of funding to respond to that. And regardless of what housing type we're talking about, it's the same type of discussion. If you do this, this is what it's going to take from my shop to accommodate that. What has been lacking is long-range planning. They know 20, 30, 40 years from now what the roads are going to look like and what the anticipated growth in housing is. The infrastructure departments, and as well as the law enforcement agencies, including the sheriff, all need to be at that table stating, your projection is this, that means I'm going to need A, B, and C to be able to appropriately do my job. So the key is being a voice at the table and realistic long-range planning.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mr. Grimm, next question. Article 6 of the Constitution is the so-called Supremacy Clause. What does this clause mean to you as sheriff?
The Supremacy Clause means, excuse me, The Supremacy Clause means that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. As a sheriff, it goes back to that oath that we take to uphold the Constitution. I think if we realize, once again, what our sacred duty is to the citizens to whom we are accountable, the rest of the job is easy. Knowing what's right and wrong is something you should learn when you're a little kid. And that's how I've tried to live my life from the time I was young, is standing up for what is right, standing up for speaking out when something is wrong. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mr. Norris, your answer, please.
You know, it goes back to what our founding fathers did with crafting this Constitution, and I think they did an outstanding job in using what has been taken from other parts of the world and that Shire Reef, and putting that sheriff and making sure that that sheriff protects the residents in his or her shire, in their county, in their area. And Article 6 is an important role of the Constitution, and we cannot compromise it at all whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your answer, please.
The Supremacy Clause has been widely overstated as to its purpose. When our founders constructed our Constitution, including the Bill of Rights, when it was crafted, it said everything not listed here is up to the states and to the people. The Constitution was constructed to limit government, and we have over the centuries got way away from its original construction. The states gave birth to the federal government. The federal government did not give birth to the states. The states are primary in their constitutions, and they gave birth to the federal government. Every law the federal government makes, if it's contrary to the Constitution, theirs or the states, does not mean they're our father and we're their kids and that's how it's going to work. The Supremacy Clause has been overused in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mrs. Edmondson, your answer, please.
Yes, thank you. I agree. It's hard to go last on this one because I think everybody said all the stuff. But, the framers did an amazing job of, building a document that protects all of our basic freedoms without all of the other noise that we encounter today and, so far in the future from when that was written. And no matter what changes in our world, those basic premises are still so true today, and we should, with every authority and power that we have, protect those rights. And so the Supremacy Clause, to me, it does say that that's the supreme law of the land. I respect that, and I respect it very much through the oath that I'll take as sheriff.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Norris, next question to you, and actually this is the last question of the debate, or of the forum. The question is, a few governors around the country are encouraging citizens to snitch on their neighbors for not following social distancing regulations. What are your thoughts on this?
It's absolutely ridiculous. To go back on some of my previous answer is that at the beginning of this, we didn't know a lot about this virus scientifically. We know a lot more about this virus today. So do I believe there are safety measures that we can take in place now to protect against the public health? Absolutely, I can. Seeing some of these videos of government overreach is absolutely sickening, and that will not happen here in Kootenai County under my administration. Seeing videos of a lone jogger that's running on the sand and then seeing law enforcement going up there and contacting this lone jogger, it's ridiculous. So no, I don't support anybody calling law enforcement to say, hey, the shop across the street is open and they shouldn't be open. That is absolutely ridiculous. And I think now we can put safety measures in place and we'll be fine from this virus.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Whitehead, your answer, please.
This is probably the easiest question of the night for me. From day one, I have been against the order, so I am obviously against people snitching on each other in reference to violation of the order, which I don't think is right. The governor of this state or any other state is not our king. We are not subjects to the king. The government has full responsibility to say this is what we are facing, whether it is a bioterror threat or the flu. And here are the precautions we suggest you take. Then it is up to us individually and collectively in our families to decide how we want to use that information to keep ourselves safe. If that means I'm not going to be at the grocery store or use restaurants or whatever, that is my liberty choice, not one that can be made by the government. If I had my druthers tonight, this auditorium would be full, or at least as full as comfortable as people felt comfortable in being close to each other. That is an individual liberty decision, not a government dictate. So the easy answer for this question is snitching on each other for violating it? Absolutely not.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Mrs. Edmondson, your answer, please.
Yeah. Whether or not the governor asks or, advises people to snitch, the true fact of the matter is they are snitching anyway without that. We've taken a number of calls already, whether they're anonymous or, direct calls into 911 for people that are violating the order. And so when those calls come in, we have a responsibility to the citizens to look into it. And the sheriff's office, in these unprecedented times, we've had to figure out how we're going to do that. And so I don't agree that the governor should be giving that advice to people, but when it does happen anyway, that those tips come in, how you handle it as a sheriff is important. Sheriff Wolfinger's done a great job of leading us in that manner, and we're educating people. The contacts that we have are designed to be educational so that we can let people know what the order says and ask them to comply. And so I think that's been a great response for us. I do appreciate that lesson that he's demonstrated in this type of setting, but the snitching and the governor's advice to do that it just seems terribly wrong.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. Mr. Grimm, your answer, please.
Thank you. Many people tell me the reason they're supporting me is because I'm not career law enforcement. And I think the actions that Robert Norris spoke of, watching these videos of this overreach, kind of demonstrates that in certain situations, in certain agencies, law enforcement has really lost touch with what they're there for. They're not there for the government. They're there to protect us. And although some of us might find the concept of snitching on your neighbor to be repugnant, we do have to be aware and address that there are a number of people, and I've been contacted by many, many people. Over 700 people thanked me for the information I provided to them. And the thing I started to notice, the trend, was it's all women that seem to be mothers. That was the trend. So what do you do when a young mother calls and says, my neighbor is doing this? As Captain Edmondson said, yes, the sheriff's office is going to answer that call and has a responsibility. My solution to that would be to instruct the caller that we are not enforcing that order. That's the governor's order. Stand by while we forward it to Idaho State Police or to the governor's cell phone.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. That completes the questions that we have for the forum. On a personal note, color me impressed. All of you have answered some very difficult questions. This is not an easy forum with no audience feedback at all. Thank you so very much for your answers, your participation this evening. So we'll move on to closing statements. We will go in reverse order that we went in for the opening statements. So Mr. Whitehead, if you would like to begin your closing statement, you may do so.
Thank you, and I want to thank you and everybody that is here tonight that put this together to make this happen. I won't belabor my final points as we've been here a while already, and I'm sure people are ready to turn it off. What I do want to point out is we are in critical times, as we just answered on our last question. And things are happening across our county, our state, and our country that are concerning. And our vote locally and nationally this year is going to be very important and pivotal to our future. I think through tonight's exercise, experience has been demonstrated, and as my logo says, experience counts. In these critical times, moving from today into the future with Kootenai County, with its growth and the inherent problems that brings, with our new national and international threats and the problems those bring, it is ever more important to have somebody in the seat of sheriff that has the experience, the track record, and the skill set to take Kootenai County into the future. So I'm asking tonight for your vote as sheriff as that person. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead, excuse me. Mr. Norris, your closing statement, please.
It is likely that each one of us here is going to say why they are the best candidate for this job. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm going to tell you to go to this advertisement. Yes, it's my advertisement, but those are not my words. Those are two undersheriffs who are your day-to-day managers of the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. And the last two undersheriffs have endorsed and supported me. They have researched all the candidates and have closely worked with one of them. And they still have come out to endorse Bob Norris. So I'm not going to tell you why I am the best. Also, we have spent hours and hours of forums with the Deputy Sheriff Association. And there is countless experience amongst the board of directors and the whole membership. They have their own separate mailer on why they believe that Robert Norris is the best candidate for this job. So it's likely all of us are going to say, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to tell you to do your research, use trusted websites, don't use anonymous websites to do any research on anything, and please, the men and women of the Sheriff's Office, the men and women of the Coeur d'Alene Police Department, Northern Lakes Fire Department, and the Coeur d'Alene Fire Department, I have been researched, vetted, investigated by all of them. What you are hearing is false and fake. So I encourage you to support the men and women of the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office and vote for Robert Norris for sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. Mr. Grimm?
Thank you.
Closing statement, please.
Dan, outstanding job. Thank you. And please, Elsa, I know you guys struggle a little bit, with some of the things going on, but this has been fantastic. And thanks to the timekeepers. And I suspect, I don't know, you were holding up that 1 minute sign early on me. No, I'm kidding, because it seemed like it comes up quick, right? But when I listen to other people, I kind of wonder. Anyways, outstanding job. I don't know, I probably shouldn't address this, but I wasn't interviewed until after decisions were made by any previous undersheriffs. I had coffee with Tad Leach after he told me he was supporting Bob Norris, so I don't know what investigation or background checks they did, but it certainly wasn't a face-to-face with me. I've never met other than Tad Leach. I've worked very hard throughout my life to make decisions that have served myself, my family, and my community well. And I intend to bring those quality decisions to your sheriff's office. As the rhetoric heats up and has heated up over in the coming days and weeks as people are already voting, I would encourage you to not engage in this type of mudslinging behavior that's been going on and the attack mailers. I know that Captain Edmondson, myself, and Mr. Whitehead were the subject of an attack mailer that came out, and it's not something that my campaign will ever engage in. And I think we need to be careful we don't need only look that far to understand the direction that law enforcement in Kootenai County could take should we elect a sheriff that does not recognize what we want here in North Idaho. There's a saying, "Ye shall know them by their fruits." And the reason I'm in this race is I want to serve and be accountable to you, my friends, and my neighbors. And I won't let you down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Mrs. Edmondson, your closing statement, please.
Well, my family, the majority of my family lives here in Kootenai County, and so the safety of the community is important to me because of that as well. I want my 10-year-old granddaughter to be safe when she's riding her bicycle or her horse on the, different areas in the county, and and I want my mother-in-law and my mom and my husband and my son and my brother, I want everybody to be safe, and everyone in the community, to me, is like family. Our organization that I work for is like family too, and in every family you have people sometimes that, that you have differences with, and people in your family that can be a little bit difficult for you. And that's okay. It doesn't take away the fact that you love them, you care for them, and that they're still family. I know and I'm confident that I have support within the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office from both members of the association and people who are not members of the association. Bear in mind that the Kootenai County Deputy Sheriff's Association doesn't encapsulate all of the members of the Sheriff's Office. It's not 100% of those members. I think right now we're at about 319 employees, maybe at the time that the endorsement was made, 185 members of the Deputy Sheriff's Association. And the numbers that you'll see in some of these advertisements don't actually show you what the actual endorsement numbers were. So even though I did not win the endorsement, the numbers are misleading that are advertised. So bear that in mind when you're making a determination on who the best sheriff will be for you. These are important things, I'm sure, probably available to you through public records, so I encourage you to look for that information. With that said, I think that the way I've led myself, and because of the setting where we are today, I also have, it's been important to me to lead a campaign that's clean, that's above board, and there have been accusations against me for not having done so. It's just not the case. It's not part of who I am. The people who know me can tell you that the way I lead my life and a Bible verse that's important to me, again, I said because of the setting, I want to be able to say this today, that something that guides me is, always be humble and gentle and be patient and bearing with one another in love. And I think that that's a very important tenet. Again, my organization is family. They're that important to me, regardless of how things shake out in the end, what happens, whether I win or lose. Everybody in that organization is still a member of my family, just as this community is, and they're all that important to me. So with that, I encourage everybody again, get your absentee ballots, make those requests, and vote for the best candidate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Edmondson. I want to thank all of the candidates for their participation in this forum, for taking the time. And I want to remind everybody who's watching, you can contact all of these candidates. You can reach out to their websites. They have contact forms available. They have phone numbers available. If there are any questions that you have that we didn't ask, or that you don't know the answer to, or you want the answer to, reach out to them. Do your own research, ask them directly, find out the answer. If you're looking for other information, obviously we have the voter guides available through the Watchmen Ministries North Idaho website. We want to thank everyone for attending. We want to thank everyone for watching this live stream. Thank you very much, and God bless.